G'day, I'm Martyn and this is The Truth of It with a little bit of a difference. Today I'm coming to you from on the road in Brisbane in a slightly different environment. And I've had a huge week in Townsville. I want to say thank you to everybody in Townsville who welcomed me, and we had a great supporter event and various other things. I'm running low on gas, but I have three things I want to talk about. The first one is the Harry and Meghan scenario. Yes, I'm going to go there. The second one is that a Canadian pastor has been thrown in jail for breaching coronavirus restrictions in the state of Alberta. I want to make some comments on that. And finally, I want to talk about the fact that they have started to ban books. This is the latest from cancel culture. Amazon has banned Dr. Ryan T. Anderson's book, When Harry Became Sally. But without further ado, let's get into it. First up, Harry and Meghan. It's interesting. I think the observation I have straight out of the block on this one is not one I've heard a whole lot from other commentators out there. The observation I want to make is this. It is about the dishonouring of parents first and family second. So my point really is the fifth commandment, honour your father and your mother. And straight away you can see where this is going. That's something that's not widely talked about in this day and age. It's not widely discussed, but it matters a very great deal. It matters so much that you just got to reflect on the fact that it is one of the 10 in the 10 commandments. I've also wondered as well a long time, if you read the end of Romans 1, where the Apostle Paul lists a whole bunch of these sins that people commit, and they're all very, very serious. But couched in the middle of this great line of very serious sins is dishonouring of parents. And you go, oh, what's that doing there? Well, clearly this is a very significant thing. It's a very significant sin. Under Hebrew law, in fact, and for any trolls out there who might be watching, I'm not affirming this, I'm just saying that under Hebrew law, it was the penalty for dishonouring of father and mother was in fact death. Jesus says in Matthew 15:3, he says, "For God commanded, honour your father and your mother." And he goes on to say, "Whoever speaks evil of father and mother will be put to death." And that's quoting what the Hebrew law once said. But here's the point of all of that. I say that just to say, look, let's remind ourselves of something. Let's remind ourselves that dishonouring of family is a very immoral act. Why do I say that? Well, here's the reality. Prince Harry has made a global spectacle of dishonouring his family. He's not only spoken evil of them himself, including his father, who he blames for inflicting great pain on Archie, but he's also sat back and probably, it seems, promoted, gone along with, encouraged his wife to do far, far worse. Even while his 99-year-old grandfather is gravely unwell in hospital, even though the family are not fully able to defend themselves by virtue of the customs of royalty, he and his wife unleash a campaign to defame, discredit, attack, and undermine them. And here's the fact. Harry's conduct is immoral, regardless of whether or not he has legitimate grievances. That's the point. You don't dishonour your family on the global stage in this way and call it right. It is not right. It is wrong. His family are in crisis thanks to efforts and events which are ultimately his responsibility. Because that's what a man does. He takes responsibility. He's the guy, ultimately, who takes responsibility for getting himself into this mess and finding himself throwing darts at his family via Oprah and the global media. He abdicates his responsibility in allowing innuendo, accusation, dirty laundry, conjecture, division, and far worse to be slung onto the world stage, targeted against those who were once closest to him. And he's acting, therefore, as one who is morally weak. And I say this, dishonouring your family is never right. Contrast the public statement of the Queen. The Queen simply, it's a very short public statement, and it just does three things. It affirms her love for Harry, Meghan, and Archie. It admits the possibility of somehow being in the wrong, and it keeps the door open to restoration and forgiveness. One of these things is a class act. One of these things is a Christian act. No prizes for guessing which. You don't have to agree with your family. They don't have to be the nicest people. But the non-negotiable, repeated commandment in Scripture is that you must honour them. It is morally wrong to do otherwise. And that carries consequences before God, of course, because it's the commandment of God. But the other thing is, it carries consequences for life as well. Proverbs, which contains many a nugget of wisdom, gives us this. In Proverbs chapter 11 and verse 29, it says, "Whoever troubles his own household will inherit the wind." And I think really the truth is, and I think this is obvious for all who can see clearly on this matter, what we're seeing is that Harry is inheriting the wind, and he will continue to do so because there is a great principle that the integrity of the family matters, and it matters on a range of levels. It matters to society. We know that. So many of society's ills would be solved or largely solved or mitigated through family strength and through family integrity. But it doesn't just matter for society, it matters to God. That's why he has said it. That's why he designed family. But it also matters to your life. And it's a great principle of wisdom. You dishonor your family at your peril, and you honor your family for your blessing. That's why God made these rules, and that is why Proverbs says what it says. So that's my first thought about the Harry and Meghan scenario. My second thought is something about victim mentality. My second thought is, I was in a conversation actually just the other day, and 4 unlikely names came up together. And I'm going to pair them put them in 2 pairs, and you'll see my point. Prince Harry, Nick Vujicic. Meghan Markle, Johnny Eriksson-Tada. Those are name pairings that could not represent more profound differences of circumstance and outlook. Nick and Johnny were dealt the most difficult hands possible in any life. Most of you, I think, will know them. Those of you who don't, Johnny Eriksson-Tada is a woman, I think she's now about 70, and she became a quadriplegic as a teenager from the neck down, completely paralyzed, and has been all through her life after a diving accident. Nick Vujicic, he was born in Australia. He's a Christian evangelist and motivational speaker that travels the world. He has no arms and no legs. He's the guy he's got like, I think a foot. I think that's about it. And he gets around with no arms and no legs and sort of shuffles around as a little torso. And it's amazing to see, actually. These 2 people are massively deprived in the sense of being born with profound or suffering with profound physical disabilities. Contrast that. Harry is dealt one of the most privileged hands possible in any life. He's a literal prince, and Meghan has risen to a similar level. They are abundantly blessed. Now, no life is free of trouble, but let's just be real about this. There's an abundance of blessing here, despite whatever trouble may be there as well. And the attitudes of these people, the 4 of them, Harry and Meghan on the one side, Nick and Johnny on the other, their attitudes are as different as their circumstances, but not in the way that you might have expected if you'd been at the beginning of life trying to look and see how it would all turn out. I'll never forget watching Johnny tell her testimony at a conference. She couldn't speak for more than 5-10 minutes before she would just burst into song. She smiled widely from the start to finish. She filled the room with joy. It was amazing. And at the beginning of this of her talk, she told of her days some 50 years ago, shortly after her accident, immobilized, bedridden, dreaming that she was at the pool of Siloam, which is described in the New Testament as a place of healing. She was so broken, she was so desperate, and she cried out to God to be healed. At the end of her talk, she told of a recent trip to Israel where she discovered the actual site of the pool of Siloam quite by chance. And she said it brought back all these memories. And she sat there in her wheelchair looking at the empty pool, and she prayed again. And you won't believe what she prayed. She prayed, "Lord, thank you for not healing me." And I actually let out a noise as I was listening to this. It was the beginning of the word no! I couldn't compute in my brain what it would take for somebody to pray that prayer and mean it. And you could tell she meant it. She said that she had learned so much, done so much, and most importantly, had discovered so much of God and of Christ because of and through her condition that was priceless to her. And she thanked God for it. And both she and Nick is the better known of the 2, I believe, they've spent their lives ministering to millions out of their hardship, and they don't breathe a word about it. Contrast that with the blame, the misery, the self-righteousness, the divisions, the innuendo, the dishonor of the 2 of the most privileged people in the world. I mean, this is a dishonoring, as I was just saying in the last bit, of a family on a global stage without any shame, even whilst Harry's grandfather languishes in hospital at 99, and his grandmother releases a statement that practically offers restoration and forgiveness and confirms her love for him and his family. In this, I just think these names, which came up in this conversation, it hit me like a freight train. I thought to myself, you know what? This is what a cancer victim mentality really is. This is cancer And you can see it here in these people, these walking, talking examples. The inward-looking posture of victimhood is the worst kind of slavery anyone can subject themselves to or be subjected to, because victims look inside themselves and then they justify themselves, and they'll continue on in a wrong pathway, but they'll be justified and they'll be right because they are blaming others, and others are wrong, and they collapse in misery. They go nowhere. It's slavery. The grateful, on the other hand, and that really is the opposite. It is those who are grateful. And gratitude is a virtue because it looks outward. It looks out of the self. Its desire is to serve others. It sees the goodness of God and it rejoices in the goodness of God because God is always good, and the grateful see that. Those who live their lives looking inwards, trapped in themselves, are one kind of person. And then there are those who live their lives looking outwards to God. And to be honest, I think that ultimately it is only God that fully saves us from ourselves. Because if we don't have Him, we've really got nowhere else to look except in here. And I want to say this. This is a little case study to make this point. And I can talk about it academically and all the rest of it, but I'm talking about real people now. Because those who say that they know God, and yet they peddle victimology in any of its forms, in any of its ideologies. And we have many an ideology today which is victim based. It is blame based. It is this whole oppression narrative is all about this. The woke thing is all about this. Those who peddle that stuff, or who themselves spend their time wallowing in narcissism about themselves and draining other people into this black hole of narcissism because they're looking in as victims and they're justifying themselves and blaming others. I'll just say this, that is the devil's work. It really is. It's the most sinister of things. Let me give one sage advice which comes from Scripture. There are two examples in the Bible which I think are tremendous warnings on the whole victimhood thing. One is Jonah, the other is Cain. I just want to make a comment about Cain. Cain is a guy who blamed others for something for which he should take responsibility, which was his sacrifice wasn't pleasing to God. But he blamed Abel because Abel was favored. And he made himself a victim. He made himself the guy who was suffering for unjust cause. And it's really interesting. God comes to Cain and warns him in that moment. Before Cain goes and does a bad thing, which is kill his brother, God says to Cain, "Why are you downcast? Why are you miserable?" And isn't it interesting? This victim mindset will always immiserate. And some people love to be miserable because they're victims. They just, for some reason, go through life this way. And it will always immiserate. It will always bring people down. It will always make them just balls of sadness. And God comes along and confronts that. And He says, He said, you've got an option at this point. Either you can do that which is right. You can stand up for righteousness. And He says, if you do that, He says, your face will be lifted up. But He says, otherwise, just be warned, in your current condition, sin is crouching at your door and its desire is to have you. In other words, if you continue thinking this way, you're going to go on and do evil because you are justifying yourself. You are blaming others, and you are going to do immoral acts in the name of your victimhood. And that will really be the end. And that is such a sage warning because Cain made the wrong choice. Sin was crouching at his door and he became the world's first murderer. And I tell you, that's what victimology does to people. It makes them do wrong and it makes them miserable and it traps them in sin. That is why this really matters. But God comes along with His great principle of wisdom for all of life and says, if you do well, will not your countenance be lifted up? And I just want to leave us with that thought. Take responsibility. Do that which is righteous. And all of a sudden, you will find yourself putting this victim mindset aside. And as God says, you'll be happy. Your countenance will be lifted up. So that's a bit of wisdom from the story of Cain in response to the Harry and Meghan business that we've all been suffering through over the last few weeks. All right, next up, Pastor James Coates of Grace Life Church in Edmonton, Canada, is in jail. And he's in jail for opening his church whilst COVID-19 restrictions are in place. He was arrested, he's been denied bail, he's in prison, he awaits trial. Okay, what's the story here? That's what I wanted to know, and I think there's other people out there who have heard bits and pieces of this story who might want to know the same thing. So I'm going to explain it, and then I'm going to give a reflection on it. Since the 26th of June 2020, the province of Alberta has mandated the following restrictions on religious services, and Edmonton is in Alberta. This is where Grace Life Church is. Number 1, gatherings must be no more than 15% of the building's capacity. Number 2, all attendees must wear masks. Number 3, all attendees must practice physical distancing. Now, 15% capacity at Grace Life Church in Edmonton, Canada would be 90 people. The church actually has 400 members, and nearly that many seem to attend every week. But like most churches, Grace Life adhered to the government's restrictions during the early months of the pandemic. But on the 21st of June 2021, Pastor Coates says that they recognised that COVID-19 was far less severe than initially projected. And so now, since about that time, for about 30 weeks, the church at Grace Life have met in person as a full church in defiance of COVID-19 regulations in Alberta. Now, they've taken some steps. They did a 14-day shutdown when 2 church members tested positive for COVID-19 to ensure that there was no intra-church transmission, and there wasn't. So they've also made masks available, hand sanitizer available, they discourage physical contact and various other things like that. But in November 2020, health inspectors from the Alberta Health Service showed up with police officers and continued to show up pretty much every week from thereafter, documenting what was going on. And on the 17th of December 2020, so about a month later, a bit more than a month, inspectors issued an order that Grace Life Church immediately rectify their breaches of COVID-19 rules. On the 20th of December 2020, Pastor James Coates was fined $1,200 by the police for sustained breaches of the restrictions. And this happened, but nothing changed. Grace Life continued to meet every week just as they had done. So on the 21st of January 2021, this is about a month later, the Alberta Health Service filed a court application to have their order enforced, and the application was granted. Nonetheless, a week later, the church met once more on the 29th of January 2021 and again on the 7th of February 2021. And on that occasion, the police arrested Pastor Coates following the service and he was released with a court date. They showed up during the service, but they waited till it was over before they arrested him, they said, out of respect for the proceedings. A week later, Pastor Coates ran another service, and this time it seems it was the last straw. I mean, he had been arrested and released with a court date, and he was in breach of a court order and all the rest of it. And so on the 16th of February 2021, the police asked Pastor Coates to hand himself in, which he did. The court was minded to release him on bail. I read the transcript because he had not committed a jailable offence. But the term of his bail included the following, and you'll see immediately what's wrong. It said, you will not attend or conduct services at Grace Life Church at 51529A Range Road, 262 Parkland County, Alberta, unless you have complied with any existing orders of the Chief Medical Officer of Health, Health Services, Police, etc., court, blah, blah. Obviously, he declined, so he was not released. An appeal was lodged, but it was denied on the 8th of March 2021, and Pastor Coates will remain in jail until the 3rd of May when his trial is scheduled. So he's in jail right now for conducting church services during COVID-19 restrictions, full church services, that is. And meanwhile, he's in jail at the moment, but Grace Life itself continues to hold full capacity weekly services, as they have been doing since July last year. So there's an associate pastor, I think, which is running the place at the moment. Pastor Coates has said the following in a recent sermon. He said, "We must call government to its God-ordained duty. Any attempt to dictate to us the terms of worship is not the government's jurisdiction, and I refuse to give the government what isn't theirs. Caesar has no jurisdiction here. Governments exist as instruments of God, and there should be unfettered freedom of worship." Now, I agree there should be unfettered freedom of worship. The fact that Caesar has no jurisdiction, I'm not sure I agree with, but that's Pastor Coates' point. In an affidavit, he says the following, and let me read you this just to give you his clear view on the subject. "We believe that a local church is to gather physically for corporate worship on Sunday," and he quotes Acts 2, Acts 27, Acts 20 verse 7, 1 Corinthians 16:2, and Revelation 1:10. He says, "We also believe that this physical gathering is distinct from and preeminent among every other gathering of the life of the church. In addition, we believe this physical gathering should consist of the full body of Christ belonging to the local assembly," and he quotes Romans 15:6 and 1 Timothy 5:20. "Therefore, compliance with the Chief Medical Officer of Health's orders make it impossible for Grace Life to fulfill the mandate outlined above. The health orders directly contravene the authority of the local church and the supreme authority of the Lord Jesus. The occupancy limit alone restricts us from meeting as a full body of Christ in a single gathering. As such, every element of the corporate assembly is restricted, since each one is to take place within the context of a single gathering. In addition, the restrictions compelling social distancing and mask wearing interfere as well." His wife, Erin Coates, said this in an affidavit. I'm informed by James and do believe that James has sincerely held religious belief. That's just legal speak. Obviously, she doesn't talk like that all the time. But she said that only the Lord Jesus Christ has the authority to prescribe the terms of worship at Grace Life, not any other authority, and that to comply with the above restrictions would be contrary to Scripture and be an act of disobedience to Christ. It would amount to fearing man instead of fearing God, or choosing to disobey God by complying with the command of an earthly authority that is in opposition to the commandments of God. Okay, I don't want to dwell too much on whether I agree with Pastor Coates or not, but I will make a comment on that. I just would rather focus on the principles at play for a second, because COVID-19 has brought these principles to the surface. Some recent legal changes, especially in the state of Victoria, in speeches that I've done, have brought these sorts of things to the surface. At what point does the government end? At what point do we disobey? Is civil disobedience a Christian thing? All that. They've all come to the surface in a way that they haven't before in recent times, and I don't think this is going anywhere. I think it's going to continue. So let me say I completely sympathise. I sympathise with Pastor Coates' position, because I hate the way that COVID-19 has been handled. I think it's set a dreadful precedent. I think that ideologically there are bad things happening in the way government is operating and the way people are giving up their freedoms in exchange for promises of wellness. So I sympathise with him, and I think his punishment is severe. I think that the convictions that he carries are also sincere. So I agree with all of that, but it doesn't mean that I would do what he did. Okay, let me explain. Foundation number one. There's some background here. Number one, government is God's idea, and we are clearly commanded to submit to it, regardless of whether we like them, regardless of whether or not we agree with them. Let me read you the actual words. Romans 13, 1-2. Every person is to be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those which exist are established by God. Therefore, whoever resists authority has opposed the ordinance of God, and they who have opposed will receive condemnation upon themselves. That condemnation in the immediate context is the condemnation of punishment from the state. 1 Peter chapter 2:13 says something very similar. Submit yourselves for the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether to a king as the one in authority, or to the governors as sent by him for the punishment of evildoers and the praise of those who do right. Now, this is said to Christians living under Roman rule. They would have felt it. They disagreed greatly with Roman law. They were oppressed by Roman occupation. Some of them had revolutionary histories in their culture, which they had to leave behind them. This was a tall order. It would have hit, and it would have been serious, because the government was not good in these days, and the things they were requiring and asking were not all good. Now, that's the first foundation. There's more than one, don't worry. Foundation number two. If you dishonour yourself by breaking the law, make jolly sure it's for the right reason. Christian witness and testimony is very important, very important. And breaking the law brings great controversy and dishonour on a person. Therefore, scripturally, we're told to make sure that when we break the law, we do so for the very, very, very best of reasons. That's 1 Peter 4:15, for example. He says, make sure that none of you suffers as a murderer or a thief or an evildoer or as a troublesome meddler. But if anyone suffers as a Christian, he is not to be ashamed, but is to glorify God. Okay, so clearly there is a possibility that someone might suffer as a Christian. Clearly this submit to the governing authorities is not a limitless thing, because we're going to find that out in a minute. There is another foundation, which is foundation number 3, break the law when you absolutely must. And when must we? Well, the exception given to the apostles is in Acts chapter 5, verse 29. We must obey God rather than men. They faced a case where they could not obey God and men at the same time. That was the point. It was impossible. They had to choose a side. They could not obey the commandments of men, so to speak, and honour God. They couldn't do it. And they couldn't honour God and obey the commandment of men. It was very, very clear. It had come to the point where they had been directly commanded to stop doing something that Christ had directly commanded them to do. But notice it must come to that, because the command to honour the government is not ambiguous, it is not unclear, and it is not, in broken Greek, it's clear. So it must come to a direct conflict. And you must say, I can't do both. I can't honour the state and I can't honour God at the same time. It's not possible. So, question. how does this line of thinking actually make sense? It makes sense for two reasons. The first one is that some functional government, even if it's wicked, is very nearly always better than no government. Anarchy tends to be the worst possible option. But really the point I want to make, that's sort of a practical observation, but probably that's why government is God's idea. And that's really the point. The first thing that we need to understand is government is God's idea for a fallen world. He instituted it. He believes it's desirable. That's good enough for me. So the government's meant to be there. The government's meant to function. The government's meant to be honoured. End of story. That's part of his design. I think there's wisdom in it, but even putting that aside, we've got to accept it's part of his design. But here's the second thing, the second reason that this might make sense. The reason that a Christian might not get to the point where they are just civilly disobedient because they disagree. That's not a good enough reason. It's not a good enough reason to say, I disagree with where this is going. I disagree with what this... No, it's got to be a situation where the government has commanded you to break God's law or commands you to not to do something that God's law says you must do. You have to be in that direct conflict. And that makes sense because there's a very interesting thing that Jesus says in John 18:36. He says this to Pilate. He says, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would be fighting, so that I would not be handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not of this realm. Therefore Pilate said to him, so you're a king. Jesus answered, you say correctly that I'm a king. For this purpose I came into the world, and for this I was born, to testify of the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice. Now that's his kingdom. It is the people who are of the truth who listen to his voice. He says, that's my kingdom. What does this mean? The statement, I want to be very clear, there's a tension here, and I hope I don't just confuse people. I hope I make it clear. The tension is that politics is not irrelevant to the Christian. Jesus himself had just said, he who handed me over to you is going to suffer the greater condemnation. You speak truth to power. You be salt and light in the public spheres. You call, as a, to use a slightly contested word, but a prophetic voice, you call the powers that be to standards of righteousness. All of that is true, and all of that must be done. But there is some other thing that's in tension with that, which is very important to grasp. It is that Jesus actually says, but my kingdom is not in earthly power structures fundamentally at the end of the day. Christianity is not a political revolution in the sense that it's not an armed conflict. It's not an overthrow of the state. It's not all about gaining political power. And in that sense, it is unlike every other idea that's ever existed. Because all other political persuasions, all other ideas, they need the levers of earthly power to succeed and to make their day. Jesus says, my kingdom doesn't need that. He says, I'm not here for earthly power this time, and he's not here for earthly power yet. He says, actually, what I'm here for is to build my kingdom, which is very, very different. And my kingdom spreads even without the powers that be. And so as Christians, if we do all that we're called to do in relation to the earthly powers, and we lose them somehow, if I could put it that way, if they turn sour, if they start to do evil, that doesn't mean that the kingdom of God is limited. That doesn't mean that Christ's promise that I will build my church and the gates of hell will not prevail against it will fail. Of course it won't fail, because fundamentally his kingdom isn't traveling in these earthly power structures. It's traveling in the hearts and minds of men and women. He says, those who listen to my voice, who are of the truth. And God works in supernatural ways. He works in natural ways. He works in all sorts of ways to make that happen, come what may, even as the nations rise and the nations fall. So let me be clear again, lest I'm misunderstood. That does not mean that politics doesn't matter. It doesn't mean that governing authorities don't have duties under God. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't speak the truth on that. We shouldn't advocate for the truth on that. And it doesn't mean that when the governing authorities honour God's laws, that is not good. It is very, very good. And it is so good that it's something we must fight for in the legitimate sense. It's something that we must use the democratic levers of power to speak for and to advocate for. We must do that. We've got that freedom now. It's incredible that we do. Unique in history. However, political power is not the primary and necessary vehicle by which the everlasting kingdom, which shall not be destroyed, which is how Jesus' kingdom is described in the Bible, it's not the primary vehicle by which it is spread. And we're not told to mount the political revolution, but we are told to honour authority until we are literally unable to. And so what the church really needs to do, I think, is to speak truth to power boldly, unashamedly, without ever, ever, ever compromising. It needs to recognize that there are ministers of God in the areas of earthly authority, and it needs to help people and empower people to be those ministers of God in that sphere. It needs to do all of those things. But at the end of the day, Christianity is not the same as politics, because this is an everlasting kingdom, which is a kingdom of people who hear the voice of Jesus and do his will. And that happens whether or not the governing authorities are, quote unquote, on our side. So I trust that clarifies rather than confuses, so that we understand that we do honour the governing authorities, because God's plans are bigger than government, and because God has designed government and means it to exist. When the governing authority says to do something or not do something, which is impossible without dishonouring God, disobeying his direct word, then we draw the line and we say no. We obey God rather than men. I trust that's been helpful about Pastor James Coates, who is in jail, and pray for him. I really think so. And it could well be that actually he's the one who sees clearly and we're all wrong. I'm actually not totally settled on the issue. And so I would say pray for that situation, that actually somehow through it all, the good would come. I don't know if I should scrunch that. I will, just for tradition's sake, but no disrespect to Pastor Coates. Final topic. They're banning books. This is very sad. Amazon is what this is about first and foremost, but it's about cancel culture more generally and where it's headed. I think we've seen a lot of stories lately about all sorts of stuff, from Mr. Potato Head to the Redskins to the Chicos to the withholding the Dr. Seuss books for publication, so on and so on. We're all seeing this. Some of those are Aussie examples. Wherever you are in the world, you're going to see similar ones. I want to focus for a second on Amazon, the world's largest bookseller. They sell 53% of all books in the USA and over 80% of all ebooks and nearly all the audiobooks. They've become the latest corporate to really get into the cancel culture thing. And we saw that when they joined forces with Google and Apple to try and cancel Parler, the social media app. And they did so and kicked off their server. Parler is back, but it's not back to its former glory just yet, because they suffered a massive setback with all that cancelling from so many big companies, and it's difficult for them to distribute their app and all the rest of it these days. But now they're starting to ban books. And you might say, well, is it Mein Kampf? Is it the Communist Manifesto? Or is it some other title that's just as bad? The answer is, of course not. It first of all was Abigail Schreier's book, Irreversible Damage. They banned her from advertising it through their systems. And that was a research book about the transgender phenomenon, especially in adolescent girls. As you can imagine, it challenged the gender-bending narrative. But now they've come out and completely banned a book from all of their brands and platforms. Ryan T. Anderson's When Harry Became Sally, Responding to the Transgender Moment. Despite it being on sale for 3 years now, Amazon has suddenly said that it violates their content policy, and they won't say, however, exactly where, how, when, or why. They just say it violates the policy. Bye-byes. Now, Ryan's book, it's important to note, was not a lightweight volume. I've read Ryan's book. It's brilliant. It was heavily research-based. It was compassionately argued, and it was endorsed by a who's who of top medical experts. And importantly, the book sold extremely well. Same with Abigail Schreier's. They're very popular books because they are giving a decent contribution to a debate of the moment. And it's worth noting, however, that it has been banned. And I just want to say this. Book banning has never been a hallmark of the good guys at any point in history. Let's just get that clear. It literally never is. Let's be clear about that. And this whole cancel culture thing, Dr. Seuss is a book thing, but there's others as well. There is something in this which is a rabid insecurity from those who are pushing the cancel culture line. It's an underlying insecurity that woke culture has, which compels them to censor, to ban, and to cancel. And really, this is what it's ultimately about. Lies don't have to be censored. There's an alternative approach to lies. They can be exposed by analysis. Lies will always be with us. Always. Whether you decide to go down the cancelling route or whether you decide to go down the analysis route or a bit of column A, a bit of column B, you're always going to have lies. But we can diminish and we can reduce them. And they can be shown up as lies. But here's the problem, right? If you go down the analysis route, truth is also exposed by analysis. And that is precisely why it must be cancelled by those who hate it, because there's no other way to stop it from spreading. If it is allowed out, if it's analysed, it will be confirmed as truth. And that is the worst possible scenario for those who are trying to enforce lies. And that is really why cancel culture, or book banning, which is the old-fashioned term for it, is never done in the pursuit of truth. Never. You will find that insecurity is strongest where these lies are the most fragile. And if you're being asked to believe a particularly obvious lie, you will find that the enforcement of it is rabid. I've said for a long time, the quickest way, the easiest way to get deplatformed, to get banned, to be censured on any platform is to speak about the transgender issue. And this present case proves that. Whether or not you speak about it graciously and carefully or not, this is the easiest way to get targeted by big tech and others. Why? Because it is the most fragile of lies. Let's be real about this. There's nothing more obvious in the world in which we live than the simple fact that it's occupied by men and women. You know which one I am simply by looking at this screen. Every person you encounter, there's a physiological reality, there's a biological reality, there's a psychological reality. We know that mums and dads are different, men and women are different. We know that we encounter people in that way, etc. It's in your face, obvious. Take the latest frontier of gender politics, the fact that biological males are playing in women's sports. I saw a picture the other day of a 6'8" biological male on a women's basketball team. You have MMA fighters fracturing women's skulls. You've got records toppling left, right, and centre. Pretty much just about everyone really, Joe Average public, knows precisely what's going on. They can see what they see. They've got eyes in their head. And the only way to make sure that they don't act on what they see and what they know, or perchance that they don't swallow the lie whole, the only way to ensure that that's avoided is to ruthlessly suppress the truth. Ruthlessly suppress it. And this is nasty for two reasons. The first reason is that this is totalitarian. And it's getting into various institutions which are capable, if not by themselves, but capable collectively of exercising totalitarian power. Big tech, big corporate, media, politics. Maybe academia, maybe not, but at least the others. It's infested all of them. And the book burners with totalitarian instincts, as I said, they are not the good guys, if you catch my drift, to master the art of understatement. But here's the other reason. I want to be very clear to Christian folk that this is not a minor matter. There's a lot of conservative voices out there. There's even people who are on sort of like what you call the sensible left or whatever. There's people right across the spectrum who say, well, this is political correctness gone mad. That is to demean how serious this is. That is to simplify it far too much. That is to misunderstand its importance and its severity. Because this is the reality. This, the gender thing, along with the target of so many other revolutionary woke causes, these things they attack creation. In the beginning, God created the male and female in his image, right? Genesis 1:27 says that very, very clearly. It's an attack on that reality. Or, marriage is oppressive and patriarchal and gender roles are this, that, and the other. And, family and childbearing is a penalty and oppressive. They just attack and attack and attack on all those things that are in Genesis 1. Genesis 2, God's good things, God's good order, God's good design. And an attack on creation is an attack on the Creator. Romans 1 teaches us that. Why? Because we're putting ourselves in his throne, in his seat, and we're rewriting his rule book and saying, you know what? We reckon we can do better. We reckon God's standards on all of this that are revealed in the very created world, we think we can rewrite the rules and get away with it. And Romans 1 tells us we don't get away with it. We don't. It says there that we bear in ourselves the due penalty for our error. In other words, we carry consequences from living this way. And the transgender thing is wreaking destruction on lives of a level that is so profound. Time fails me to tell you of how serious it is in the lives of children who go on to these puberty blockers, and that's pretty much a sentence to lifelong changes. Many of them will regret it. It's the same with the interruption of, the destruction of family, the destruction of marriage, the denormalizing of heterosexual relationships. All of these things carry pretty serious consequences. We're wealthy enough these days and we've got enough technology to mask some of the consequences. The Romans 1 says you won't get away with it in your person. You just won't. There's guilt, there's all sorts of things that go crazy. So this is the most personally destructive avenue a society can go down. But also that it tells us in Romans 1 something very important and sober. It is against this tendency to rewrite the creation rules that God's wrath is revealed on a society. And it says, when people want this and when people double down on this, what does he do? His wrath is revealed in this. He gives them over to it. In other words, he says, all right, have it. If that's what you want, have it. If you want to rebel to that extent, if you want to say that I'm not real and the things I've revealed in nature itself that are in front of your eyes are not real and you want to be gods, then have it. And the consequences will flow. It's a very serious moment for any culture to reach. And it's why very few cultures survive this kind of thing. And well, actually, I don't think any culture ever has, to be honest. But anyway, that's probably a whole history thing in itself. So let us not underestimate the severity of this issue. And the importance is that we do not succumb to cancel culture. And the importance is that we don't allow it to be relegated to a fringe issue, the things that are being cancelled, which tend to relate to sexuality, gender, and so forth, but that we continue to tell the truth on these things because the world needs it. I'll never forget having dinner with a group of ex-LGBT people. And they sat around and they told me, please don't stop telling the truth on this because there's people like us out there who need to hear it. And they were once LGBT, they're converted to Christ, they're Christian folk, no longer identify as LGBT, whether they were trans or whether they were gay. And they sat there and looked me in the eye and said, don't stop teaching the truth. It matters. The consequences are too grave. So let that be an encouragement for us all not to stop, but also to understand that the nature of what's going on is not just madness. It's, well, to use an old-fashioned word, it's evil. I'm Martyn, and that was the truth of it. Hey, thank you so much for watching. If you liked what you saw, then make sure to hit the like button. If you want to never miss another video again, make sure to subscribe, or you can right now watch more videos right here. Cheers.